So welcome everybody. This is the third time we're doing this, having a workshop on prefixes, CURIEs, and IRIs. And I think somebody might have tried to throw some URN stuff in there as well. The last 2 years we did this, we had the great chance to talk about some of the issues we're having as a community, like the software that we're building, the data sets that we're building on top of that software and that use that kind of software, some of the problems we have with our data itself, and yeah, some of the ideas that we have on how to work with it. So this is the third time we're doing this. I can put again into the chat the Google Doc that serves as our agenda. I'd like to invite anybody to make comments on that agenda, to add text to it. If you want to add yourself as sort of a participant to keep track of who joins these things, we might put that in Wikidata at the end. I have some slides to start the night off, and then we have a couple talks that people will give, like lightning talks based on some of the stuff they're working on. And then we'll leave as much time as possible for discussion, because it turns out every year people come up with really interesting things they want to talk about. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to screen share. I'm going to show you my presentation for sort of welcoming everybody. So hello, I'm Charlie Hoyt. I am at Northeastern University in the Curie Lab for Computational Biomedicine. And yeah, so I'm going to moderate today's session and give you a little bit of background on what's happened since last year and where we're going next, I think, as a community. And yeah, so the goals ostensibly for today are to reflect on the progress since last year, to talk about some of the new ideas we've got, tools, workflows, philosophies, and again, which is something we do every year, is collect our current use cases and pain points related to our prefix maps, our extended prefix maps, CURIEs, IRIs, and prefixes. And we'll use this as a time. Today we have 90 people in the chat right now, so this is pretty attractable to have a interactive discussion. So again, this is the link to join. I've also put it in the Zoom chat. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of background on some of the vocabulary we're going to use while talking today, and then I'll give you a little bit of an update on the Bioregistry and how this sort of relates to some other projects that people are working on, and then open the floor up. So yeah, we're talking about two flavors of semantic web identifiers a lot in this group. We've got our URIs, which people are pretty familiar with. This is similar to IRIs and URLs. There's a couple very important nuances between them, but for the most part, we talk about them on the level of URIs, which are the most kind of generic thing without getting into some language issues. And then we've got compact URIs. So this same URI is for a chemical that I use always as my example, alstropolone. We've got this local unique identifier part, which is the same in both in teal. And then we've got a prefix in both. So inside our URI, we have a URI prefix. And inside our Curie, we have a Curie prefix. And the prefix is always consistent across the same identifier resource. And the local unique identifier changes based on the entity that's being sort of curated or is represented inside that resource. I've got a big vocabulary list. I'm not going to go through this whole thing because we're going to touch a lot of these as we go, but this is maybe useful. I'm using the phrase identifier resource to talk about like a database or ontology or some resource that's actually like minting identifiers. So the last one I used was Kebi for minting identifiers for chemicals and chemical classes and roles. That identifier resource sort of corresponds to a semantic space, which is like the set of all of the local unique identifiers. The semantic web people usually call this a namespace, though it's a little bit misleading because it doesn't necessarily imply that there's names that go along with the things inside the semantic space. And let's try and use the phrase local unique identifier instead of identifier, because the right identifier could be considered to be maybe like a globally unique identifier, like a URI, or maybe a locally unique identifier, like a Curie. So we'll try and be specific. I already mentioned what the Curie prefix and the URI prefixes are, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what prefix maps are in a couple slides. Yeah, the last two ideas, which maybe a lot of people are familiar with, but maybe not, is a provider, which is something that takes a local unique identifier and gives you a web page that has some kind of information. Maybe it's human readable, maybe it's an API endpoint. And then there's the idea of a resolver or a meta resolver, which turns a Curie into like a generic service that can turn Curies into the provider endpoints. Okay, so one of the big things to mention while doing this workshop is the Bioregistry. And to describe this just in one slide, it's a registry of all the prefixes that go with all the identifier resources and the semantic spaces and the metadata that's associated with them. So all of their synonyms for the Curie prefixes, all the synonyms for the URI prefixes. It's sort of, in addition to being a registry, it has this novel aspect that it adds the meta registry, which maps between what are the prefix representation for each identifier resource in many different external registries. So this includes the OBO Foundry and identifiers.org and many other ones. And similar to name to thing and identifiers.org and some other of the external registries, it has the capability of acting as a resolver and redirecting to web pages for queries. And so notably, the bioregistry is open and community oriented. So it's really built on this open code, open data, and open infrastructure principles. This is to ensure that people can make contributions and to improve its longevity. And to go along with that, on the social side, is community oriented. So it's built on GitHub. It has contribution guidelines, a code of conduct, project governance to help maintain the community that goes around it. So on the side, we've got sort of the list of the added benefit of bioregistry on top of many of the other registries, but we can kind of go one step further and take a look at who's actually using the bioregistry. So this is kind of a cool list. This list has got a lot bigger in the last year, and I'm really happy to say that there's many different institutions and companies that are starting to use it. It's found its way into lots of different pieces of software and data modeling systems, into different kinds of data like knowledge graphs and ontologies and other registries. It's a tool that has been used for normalizing CURIEs, normalizing prefixes, normalizing URIs. It's also been used for expanding them and in a variety of other lookup of metadata. So the highlights from the last year, the Bioregistry has a lot of new content. I won't read this page off, but you can see we've added a lot more prefixes, a lot more synonyms, several new registries and many mappings, and a lot of new people have made contributions. Something I'll talk about a little bit more is we've introduced the CURIEs package, both in Python and in Java, and later in other languages, that takes a lot of the core functionality of the Bioregistry and makes it generic for anybody's prefix maps, which again, I'll come back to this in a bit. And another thing that's important is the work that we've done on making contexts, which is the answer to the question, what do you do when you or your community disagrees with something in the Bioregistry and you need to make some modifications? Is it time to rebuild the Bioregistry from scratch, but have your own version of it? Or can you just reuse what's there and use this idea of Bioregistry contexts? We've improved the granularity of URI annotations. So this is something that a couple of people have mentioned. I think it's also going to be the end of James's discussion on the OLS usage of Bioregistry. So this is something to look forward to. We have thought a lot about the conflicts that happen when we have a community that disagrees on maybe what prefix we should use or what URI expansion we should use for a given resource, and what happens when people in the community disagree, and what happens when people in the community disagree with the actual creator of that resource. And so this happened many times, and so we've got a proposal for how to deal with that. This is another open discussion, which we might want to come back to later. We also sort of generalized the Bioregistry to make it possible to deploy a custom instance of it, which both include like novel prefixes, maybe ones that are outside of the biology and life science domains. So we did this for space weather in one of our projects. And then also making like subsets. This was requested actually as well by the NIH last year following this workshop. And then something that the Maastricht team helped us with was creating the identifier mapping service, which is a re-implementation of this the Sparkle endpoint that originally identifiers.org published, but I don't think the service exists anymore. So we now have a way of redeploying that with the Bioregistry. Okay, I'll give a little bit of details on each of these, and then then we can open it up. So the CURIEs package implements all of this CURIE and URI operationality. And we've seen so many people implement expansion from CURIE to URI or compression from URI to CURIE. We've seen this implemented so many times. And in so many places, it's implemented incorrectly that it was worth building a single use package that just deals with these problems. And so that became the CURIEs package. Maybe this isn't a good package name, but we've implemented it both in Python and Java. And then, there's also interest to implement this in other languages to make sure that this functionality, which is super core to everything we're doing, is available for different languages. In addition to the compression and the expansion, this also has a reference implementation of the chaining algorithm, which is when you have multiple prefix maps, how do you combine them together using various rules, and also taking into account synonyms when they're available. We also have an implementation of this algorithm called reconciliation, which is what you do when you have conflicts that you need to deal with. So for example, the really famous one between the OBO Foundry world and between the identifiers.org sort of world is GEO, which is in the OBO world, it's the geographical entity ontology. Within the genomics community, it's the NCBI's gene expression omnibus. And so when you try and combine prefix maps that contain one of these things, they clash. So you need to know that ahead of time, and you need to have an algorithm that helps you to remap them in a way that makes sense. The last step implementation, which we can come back to these if these are interesting, is the URI prefix discovery. So given some arbitrary data set that has URIs, so typically a semantic web document like RDF, what are all of the URI prefixes that we should assign Curie prefixes to? And this is really useful as a data science tool. Okay, so all of this is living in the CURIEs package, and we want to do this with high quality code standards and have lots of high testing. So I mentioned that we were using prefix maps. This is the way to associate your Curie prefix and your URI prefix. But it turns out that the typical data structure people use for this, which is like a literal map, which has keys and values, this isn't enough in most places because we need to know which prefix is the canonical one that goes with a URI prefix. And so you can have multiple keys that point to the same value in a dictionary data structure. But this isn't enough because we want to know which one is the canonical one. We might want to have several keys and several values that'll correspond to each other. So the extended prefix map data structure is a way to deal with this. So it's a little bit more verbose, but it's a lot more specific. And so the CURIEs package also implements this. And this is something people can consider using, especially as they consume content from the Bioregistry, which has all of these prefixes. Okay. I mentioned there's this idea of Curie remapping, and I already gave the GEO example. So this is how this looks in practice. If you're writing Python code, you can accomplish it this way. One of the important things about this Curie remapping algorithm is that it's declarative. It means that we can come up with some configuration that does it. So actually, the most important line in this is where it says remapping, and then it says GEO maps to ncbi.geo, and then GEO. So this is the Bioregistry prefix for the OBO Foundry ontology, the geographical entity ontology, and that maps to GEO. So we need to sort of do two mappings at the same time to make sure they don't collapse into the same record. And this is declarative, so we can reuse this configuration in other places. And so, yeah, there's similar high-level API functionality for if you want to do this sort of remapping on the URI prefix level instead of the Curie prefix level. And then also for adding additional content to a prefix map. So it's like chaining together. So given that the CURIEs package implements some of these algorithms in a reference way, we can come back to this idea. What do I do if my project disagrees with part of the Bioregistry's de facto standard? So this happens a lot in the OBO Foundry. This happens in the Monarch initiative. And I'd like to try and reduce people's desire to rebuild functionality for building up prefix maps and building up their extended prefix maps in these contexts. So this is a lot of synonyms for a similar sort of thing. So inside the Bioregistry, there is this way of creating a fully declarative configuration that says, this is the way the Bioregistry pulls data in. I want to arrange it in a certain way that works for my project. And I want to include configuration for deciding what is the most high priority external prefix to use. So for example, you want to use OBO Foundry prefixes as the highest priority one, or maybe you want to use identifiers.org prefixes as the highest priority one. And then you can also do remapping. So like I just mentioned before, so this is the declarative setup for doing remapping, and then also doing custom remapping. So in the OBO Foundry, they want to use PMID, and they want to use this expansion, which is different from the standard RDF expansion. And so we want to have all of this to be declarative. We want it to be version controlled. We want to have a place that we can publicly discuss what is this context and how do I change the Bioregistry, and then build all the resources that people can reuse, like extended prefix map files, shackle definitions, JSON LT prefix maps that can be consumed externally, and then all of them get pearls that go with them. So these get generated every night with the Bioregistry's nightly build. So who could be doing this sort of thing that I'm describing right now? So first, OBO Foundry, like I mentioned. So Nico and Anita have taken sort of the responsibility for maintaining this context. The next place that I really think should work on doing this, and happy to work with them, is Monarch. And And then other places, which are like projects that have their own prefix maps, which the Bioregistry itself actually consumes, are like the Gene Ontology, UniProt, Cellosource, and the NCBI GenBank. So they all have their own prefix maps that they define in kind of ad hoc ways. And it would be great if we could see some of that centralized, or at least a little bit of discussion back and forth. Okay. I put a slide on prefix maps. Maybe Sarah wants to say something about this later. Yeah, are you on the line, Sarah?
I sure am.
Yeah, so if you want to say something about this later, I can skip this slide. Otherwise, I can give like some really high level update.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so prefix maps is sort of a similar, so it's a related package that solves a similar problem to what I just mentioned with this bioregistry context. So prefix maps is like a Python package, and it has an alternate implementation for chaining together different registries. And so this actually includes some stuff that's not in the bioregistry, including bioportal, like this hand-curated file that Harry made, and also prefix CC. I've been a little bit hesitant myself to use prefix CC because it's full of a lot of spam and sort of links to illicit websites. So the quality of that is questionable. But anyway, the point of this package was to support BioLink and LinkML originally. And so it's got some community-specific flavor to it. In 2023, though, we were able to update this to reuse the CURIEs package and to reduce the need for having all of these re-implementations of some of these core functionalities. We're also able to include the Bioregistry's Curie prefix synonyms and URI prefix synonyms, because one of the other, the Bioregistry is one of the resources that prefix maps consumes and heavily relies on. So a couple ideas for improving prefix maps in the future. We have this problem where its merging algorithm has a couple, I think, some bugs in it. So when we have some disconnected records from Wikidata, we're not seeing them collapse together, even if they're synonyms that should make them collapse. It can better use the Bioregistry's preferred prefixes. So there's like a special kind of prefix in the Bioregistry that for Curie prefixes it's the preferred one. So typically this is like stylized capitalization. Yeah, we might be able to piggyback some of the code the Bioregistry uses for extracting other registries, and then prefix maps could reuse those. And yeah, I think if we can reuse the Curie's chaining operation and prefix maps, we could probably solve this issue up here, and then again reduce like more code that has to be maintained across our community. Okay, another thing which was mentioned earlier is this idea of RDF URI format strings. So some URI format strings, so this is related to URI prefixes. Some of them are supposed to be just for web pages. Some of them are supposed to be used within semantic web scenarios, and some of them can be used for both. So in the Obo Foundry world, you can use the same URL that appears in RDF, and you can also use it for making web pages because it resolves. But that's not always the case. And sometimes it's not obvious. So the Bioregistry now has different slots. So you can say, what are the properties of a given URI prefix? Is it for RDF? Does it resolve? And yeah, so this has been requested by a couple groups. First, prefix comments. So following last year's workshop, we had a lot of follow-up discussions with Michel Dumontier, and actually we've effectively been able to combine the efforts from prefix comments and Bioregistry. So we've incorporated everything they found super important that wasn't in Bioregistry already, and now, if I understood correctly, they're actually not maintaining it anymore because they've just used Bioregistry directly. And then, like we mentioned before, Obo Foundry, of course, is interested in this sort of thing. Okay. Another big discussion, which we could come back to later, is the idea of identifier space owners. So I mentioned before what happens when the community disagrees on things, and what happens when the community disagrees with the actual creator of an identifier resource in the semantic space. This has happened, several places with NCBI resources, recently with like PubMed. This also happened with OMIM and some of their resources, and we have an ongoing and probably unresolvable discussion about enzyme classes or EC codes. And so the idea of an identifier space owner and this proposal that goes with it is, how do we interact as a community with the creators of these resources, and what is the role of the creator to be able to prescribe or prescribe the way that we should be using CURIEs versus the Bioregistry's role, which is typically as a descriptive resource, which says what does the community actually do and how does the community use these things. Okay, I mentioned it before, we've sort of had some thoughts about generalizing and reusing the Bioregistry's code base with different data sets. So in one of the projects that I'm working on, AskM, we've sort of built up custom ontologies, which I don't think are useful for the whole community, but it's useful for us to have our own copy of the bioregistry that can resolve things. And so we had the version of the bioregistry running for epidemiology, so it's a subset of stuff that's interesting from the bioregistry already, and then some extra things. We also completely started from scratch with ontologies related to space weather and other resources related to space weather. And I think the NFDI, so this German National Research Data Infrastructure Projects, they have a lot of different domains where the bioregistry might be a useful platform for them. And I think Bhavin is here to say something about that later. So he'll get his chance. Okay, another thing to point out is we built this identifier mapping service. And so this was really like the hard work of Vincent and Jurven. And so this was a re-implementation of the Sparkle-enabled identifier conversion with identifiers.org. So the idea is that you can create sort of a virtual triple store that lets you link together different synonyms, like actual URIs representing specific entities, and linking together all of them. Now, it wouldn't be possible to instantiate this database of triples in reality because there would be, hundreds of trillions or more. So it's nice that this is now like a service you can kind of refer to as part of another Sparkle query that's been federated. Okay, I think I have 2 more slides maybe. We've got bioregistry buzzword bingo. So there's been random assorted things to improve the fairness of the bioregistry and its data. So we've implemented bioschemas annotations. We've done content negotiation, which allows us to do some of these fair checks. So like fair is fair was one of the targets that we did. So all the pages you could get RDF out of. And then we've also got this sort of ad hoc bioregistry schema, which maps together many meta vocabularies like SH with shackle, and then void, the identifiers.org vocabulary, and van. Yeah, and then on top of all this, I mentioned the open code, open data, and open infrastructure thing earlier. We've actually made an article that's discussing some of this philosophy and design behind the bioregistry and how that's sort of a more generic roadmap that people can reuse. So if that's interesting to you, you can also check out this preprint. Okay, almost done. Looking forward in the roadmap. So there's actually a really big piece of news which I want to share with everybody, is that we actually got some specific funding for the bioregistry from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And so we're really excited. This is going to allow us to work on maintaining the bioregistry and developing and improving it. I'll give a little bit more information about that on the next slide. So we've got like a set of goals in our roadmap. This is kind of big. I don't know if I'm going to read all of this, but the idea is to improve our curation, to actually do backend development on the code, to build infrastructure for helping us do better curation. Like I mentioned before, to make some different versions and different programming languages of the tools that are supporting and using the bioregistry. Also to build data science tools on top of that that can help us with monitoring our data health. So this is something that we're thinking about in the OBO Foundry community a lot. And then, yeah, making deeper integration with other tools that exist already. So the ODK, the Ontology Access Kit, SESM, LinkML. Yeah, on top of that, part of this grant is really about doing training and outreach. So we want to partner up with organizations to help them use these tools to improve their data standardization. We want to partner with journals to maybe add structured annotations. So this is something that we piloted with ManuBot with Daniel Himmelstein a couple of years ago, and this was really interesting. So maybe this is something that can be scaled up and put into one of these bigger publishers. And we've also found a lot of people are interested in data management plans these days, and we want to partner with funders to help them develop guidelines for making data management plans. And then therefore the grantees that are going to be applying for grants with these funders, how are they going to make data management plans? The bioregistry can be a tool for them. Yeah, and so maybe this means that we can do some community stuff with some of this funding. Maybe we can host a hackathon. There might be the possibility for doing subcontracts. So people keep this in mind, and we can follow up discussions on that. All right, I have 2 sets of slides from people who couldn't be here today. I just want to share them quickly. The first is from Sean Tan, and he's in a pharma company right now, and he was nice enough to make some slides on how he's using the bioregistry and the CURIEs package as a pharma company person on an ontology and research data management team. So they're typically having the problem that there's public ontologies that aren't fit for purpose. They need to come up with ways of merging them and doing the typical standardization. And so they're able to use both the infrastructure from CURIEs and the bioregistry to do that. And specifically, they're interested in SESM mappings these days as a way of tying together many external public ontologies as well as with their internal ones. And then this typical kind of downstream usage of ontologies, which might be building knowledge graphs, might be annotating their data. Okay, the other thing is we got really interesting news from the BioPax crew. So the BioPax is this format for encoding biological mechanisms in OWL, and it's mainly part of Pathway Commons, or Pathway Commons is built on using a lot of BioPax data. And so the main library is a Java library that works with BioPax, and they actually have spent a lot of time in the last 2 years switching from using identifiers.org XML, which I'm not sure if it's available anymore. Now they're consuming the Bioregistry's JSON file, and they're using that to do normalization and also curie and IRI conversion. And yeah, so this will be released soon. So I thought that was really interesting. I actually just got an email over the weekend about this from Igor. Okay, I'm done now. I think I took a lot longer than I put on the original schedule. So there's a chance, I think Nico has some slides if he's able to. So he has COVID right now, he might not be able to talk. I know James has some slides. This would be a great time if anyone wants to talk about OAK and how CURIEs and Bioregistry are used in OAK. And then also, I saw that Renato's on the line from identifiers.org, so maybe he wants to give a quick update, and we may want to talk about the NFDI, which is another big consumer of Bioregistry. Okay, yeah, great.
Would you be able to share the slides because I'm in bed on the phone, so I can't easily share slides now. I can talk through them though.
Yep, one sec, I can do that.
All right. Just head to the second page. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Charlie and Harsh have also refactored recently a lot of the logic in SOMPy. And one of the things I think that is that really comes over and over back is the kind of fact that all of our code bases do have this like similar logic of this joke that James made before. How do you identify the prefix part of a string? How do you parse? How do you do is curie, is URI? How do you compress? How do you expand and so on? So and it was really crazy to see how this code base, basically like hundreds and hundreds of lines of code, really went away when we switched to the CURIEs package. So if you go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, SESM is a mapping standard where we primarily ship mappings in TSV format, and all the kind of, or most of the data types in there, like entity reference, or a lot of them are entity references, and entity reference in this format are communicated as CURIEs. And of course, in our use cases where we go a lot between the RDF ontology world and this format, being able to switch or change between URIs and CURIEs in a reliable manner is extremely important. So we have this, for those of you that don't know this, we have like this, we actually ship the CURIE map that is necessary to, or you would call it prefix map, that is necessary to interpret the CURIEs that are used within the table as part of the of these TSV files or mapping sets. So we need these CURIEs in particular for expansion, as I said, and also for validation purposes. So some pain points that we have, of course, standardization, in particular when, for example, you have a use case where you already have a prefix map and the user provides a second prefix map on top of this. So you need to be able, in a very smart way, to figure out which prefixes to prefer from the user supplied ones, and which from the default ones, if so desired. And all of this logic is now implemented using this chaining functionality in CURIEs. And of course, there are also this issue with conflicts and collisions, where you have, for example, multiple prefixes unfolding to different URI prefixes, or the other way around. And this is one thing that I really want to shout out. That was like an amazing work that Charlie did, is to really like write this down really carefully, how these kind of collisions and conflicts in the face of multiple prefix maps are resolved in a kind of like standardized manner. So you have like a really dependable system now where you can chain multiple prefix maps together and know exactly how the reconciliation will work in the background, well documented as well. Yeah, of course, and and this is a thing that we've implemented so many times over and over that anyone who's working with me is not allowed to ever think about implementing that again by themselves, and it has to use this package. So yeah, it's great. Next slide. Yeah, we've talked about the prescriptive context that we have in OBOT. That's something that Charlie has described before. Here, this is our way to kind of control certain prefixes if we don't agree with the preferred selections in the bioregistry, and also give us a little bit more control. So this is actually a pattern that I really like for implementation. We actually add, so we have like a GitHub action running every week that refreshes the context from the bioregistry that one of the SOMPy developers can review and check, did all the changes in this prefix map actually make sense, or are they all good? And if they are not, you can go and override your context definition. And we actually ship the toolkit now with the extended prefix map that we pull from bioregistry, and so that we always reliably use the same one for each version of SOMPy. Yeah, so I think the rest of the things I've already said. Both Charlie and Harshad have started working on simplifying downstream uses of SASM in Oak. So there are some refactorings happening in Oak right now. I don't know whether this is finished. I haven't looked at my emails for a while, but we are very close to that. Yeah, cool. Thanks. I think that was it. There was a lot of pull requests being made, so the last slide is just an impressive list of the awesome pull requests, especially you, Charlie, made for SOMPy. So thanks a lot for doing all this work, and thanks for Harshad for pulling them all through. So yeah, that's it from me.
Great, thank you, Nico. I hope you feel better.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, while we're doing all of these, contributed talks, we can directly go into discussion about them after, or we can go through the whole list, and James can go next. Does anyone have any comments on Nico's slides before we move on? Did anybody?
Random system-related question. So recently I bumped into an issue where I needed to create mappings between terms that cannot be expressed using a single query, where you have to have multiple queries in some kind of a relationship. Is there already an agreed upon syntax for doing that? I know that this has been subject of discussion.
All right, yeah, this is no, this is a bit of a hornet's nest question. I will send you and anyone that is interested a proposal that we made, but it's already like the problem with this proposal is that we will probably adopt it because we couldn't find anything that's better. But I can tell you that no matter how you propose to describe, let's say, a complex entity that is composed of multiple queries inside of a single URI expression or any kind of expression, you will always get like multiple viewpoints on how it should be done. And let's say Charlie prefers things like fixed order, no keys, like where you don't have like a slot description for the different query values that you put in this expression. And we in the end zoned in on something that I'll send you. That actually I share the link now, even though I don't want to discuss it now because I have a lot of headaches from all the negative feedback about it, but I'll send it now. One moment.
Thanks. Okay, great.
I think there's also some slides that were on one of the Biocuration 2023 talks that I can send along.
Yeah, I came across some slides recently that Nico, you put together that was really informative. And so I was just wondering if that question was resolved or not, but I guess it's still ongoing.
We switched the syntax, so they are not anymore transported as URI parameter. We found this a standard called JSON URL, which allows us to encode simple JSON expressions in the path part of a URI. And I went to ISWIC a few weeks ago, and I ran around there and I asked a few people, and someone actually dug out a concept from 2016, which is called self-unfolding URIs, which looks very, very similar to this. And that kind of gave me the confidence that we can move this a little bit forward. So I'm sure that there's never going to be a way to standardize this on community level. It's just too ugly, but I think it's the best way we can do it, and I'm convinced in this, and I think that for at least our organizations, I'm going to push it forward.
James, are you ready?
Yeah, so I'll be very quick. So just share screen. I'm gonna quickly talk for a couple of minutes about how we've implemented the Bioregistry in the latest version of OLS, which is probably most of you have used the ontology lookup service at some point, and might be aware that we've released a new version, which is OLS 4. And that's recently replaced OLS 3 in production. But if you haven't used it, it's basically a search engine for ontologies. Ontologies which often reference other terms and database entries, and they usually do this with string literals, which are CURIEs. So you can see here an example of an ontology term defined in RDF XML, and the CURIEs that are referenced by the hasdbxref predicate, which is not the most expressive predicate in the world, but however, these are still useful links in lots of cases. And in OLS 3, we just displayed these as text, so they weren't clickable. But thanks to the Bioregistry in OLS 4, we've been able to turn these into clickable links by resolving them. So OLS is a very, it runs a nightly data load, and it tries to materialize everything so that we've got everything ready to render the pages when people request ontology terms. So we can't really use, for example, APIs when you load an ontology page, because it would be very slow and unreliable. So what we do is on nightly data load, we look for patterns in the text which look like CURIEs, and then we search for the prefix in the Bioregistry JSON file. And if we get a match like this match here for a UMLS identifier, then we use the Bioregistry to turn that into a URL. Then we materialize that in our OLS database, and we put a source on to say that it was resolved by the Bioregistry. And then we include the URL, which ultimately results in a link being displayed in the OLS 4 user interface. And also it means if you access OLS programmatically, you get the URL as well as the identifier. So we've still got some open questions, and that's that the Bioregistry at the moment mostly resolves things to URLs. Whereas sometimes you have ontology identifiers. So I think earlier someone was talking about RDF identifiers. So how do we make this distinction between URLs, which are supposed to be resolvable, and identifiers in the semantic web space? Also, we've got quite a messy approach at the moment of essentially looking for anything that looks like a query and then trying to turn that into a link. So I think there's an open question about how ontologies can better include these links in bodies of text. So for example, maybe we need to have some markdown encoding for descriptions or something. And also at the moment, we're just using the Bioregistry's JSON file. OLS doesn't have any opinions at the moment about how mappings are resolved. But it does mean that we're not actually going through the context API at all. So if we wanted to change the preference of how these things are resolved, that would be something we'd have to implement. But at the moment, yes, we're just using the kind of master list that Bioregistry provides. And that's it. Thank you.
And James, can I ask, how do you distinct, like, I guess there are some ontology kind of terms that when you click on them, you would want to stay in the context of OLS, and others maybe that are more like URLs where you click on them and you get redirected to some external resource.
Yeah,
so
And this is part of the problem with the distinction between URLs and RDF identifiers. So at the moment, if something looks like, because when we load the list of ontologies from OBO, we get these preferred prefixes. And we prioritize ontologies over anything else. So if we get a query which uses a preferred prefix from the OBO list, then we resolve that as an ontology identifier, and it'll be an internal link within OLS. We use the bioregistry as a fallback after that. But that doesn't answer the question of what if you have a database which also has an ontology representation. See, at the moment, we're always going to prefer the ontology representation because we don't have any providing the ontologies loaded in OLS.
Thank you. Yeah, makes sense.
James, do you think that you might have some kind of descriptive statistics about the results that come out of what was able to be parsed and what wasn't? So like going back 2-3 years when I started querying bits of the bioregistry, I was really just downloading the OBO Foundry ontologies and then iterating through them and parsing all of the cross-references, like similar to what you're doing right now. And then I just kept going one at a time, like, okay, that's a query that looks like a query, but it doesn't have a prefix that goes with it. And, like 400 or 500 prefixes added to the bioregistry later, like it covers most of them, but, things are curated at a pretty high rate and new things get added all the time. So I'm wondering if OLS is a place where we can also have like a dashboard about the metadata, health quality, and all these ontologies, since you're already parsing them anyway.
Yeah, I think that's one, because OLS is doing this quite regularly. I don't think we've exploited that very much as a resource for being able to track things over time as well. Because if we could produce some kind of report from the mapping, then you'd be able to see how the coverage increased over time, hopefully, etc. We should talk about that. Like we do provide everything as a JSON file, but it might be better to have, if we're parsing every single ontology and going through them anyway, it might be better to do something as part of the data load.
Yeah, by the way, the other thing you mentioned about the IRIs versus the URIs and RDF versus not RDF and resolution versus not resolution, I think a lot of people are really interested in this still. And so the bioregistry, like probably since the last time we talked about this, we've sort of added this field, which is specifically for like RDF, URI formatter strings, which corresponds to the URI prefix for an RDF.
Yeah, I think this is further compounded by the fact that sometimes the RDF IRIs are resolvable URLs and sometimes they're not.
Yeah, so we also, like 2 weeks ago, we added another field onto all of these annotations where you can say if it actually resolves or not.
Yeah.
So next time you start consuming that, you may be able to take advantage of this Boolean flag that says if you can resolve it or not using this.
Certain people in the community would argue this would be a lot cleaner if RDF didn't even pretend to have URLs as its identifiers and separate the resolution from the IRIs. But yeah, we'll stay away from that particular debate. But yeah, we're in the Bioregistry. It's amazing work, and I think that although we're not using it in OLS, the fact that you're actually addressing the context dependence of how you resolve things is so important. Like every project ends up specifying context in a different way.
So James, I don't know if you know, but even though the OLS isn't itself really a registry, it does actually find its way into being annotated as a registry within bioregistries. So when you define these prescriptive contexts, like the one I mentioned before, you can actually put the OLS like configuration to be the highest one. So that might be sort of a first-party solution inside Bioregistry for generating a context that's useful for you. But to be honest, if I were you, I would put custom logic for checking stuff that's OLS.
It's because OLS, I mean, yeah, we don't think of it as a registry, but then sometimes the ontology developers will, because they don't have a version of their ontology website associated with it hosted anywhere that allows you to access individual entities, they'll just put the OLS URL format as their redirect from the RDF identifiers. So
I guess it's also a little bit of a scope creep that the bioregistry consumes the OLS, but because it's one of the only resources that actually downloads and parses all the ontologies each night, it's sort of a reliable place to get extra metadata that goes with each prefix. Like what's the current version, or is there like a home page that's associated with it? or what's the license, for example. Actually, that's a kind of piece of information which is really useful to have when you look at a prefix, but it's hard to get. But the OLS has it because it parses all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So also on the list, I didn't see that or reach out soon enough to get other people to create slides, but I see there's some people from the NFDI consortia that are here. So from actually several different ones. Do any of you have anything to say? I know Bhavin, he had a slide from like a talk that he gave at the Ontologies for Chem conference, which actually was about how some of this works. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have anything to say about that, or maybe Roman or David. Okay. Yeah, so Sierra, maybe do you have anything, any updates about prefix maps, or maybe give a little bit more context to like BioLink and LinkML, where this stuff is all going and how this sort of fits on the other side of this prescriptive context? Crickets. Okay. Let's see what else is on our list.
So maybe I could say something to the NFDI, I would say from my perspective, because what we will start next year is that we submitted a proposal about terminology services for NFDI. And what we want to do there is that we split up OLS or one of the other terminology servers or ontology lookup servers out there into smaller widget HTML components or something like that. And what we are using in the backend is still one of the different systems like OLS. So that means if Bioregistry is directly integrated to OLS, we will also have this data afterwards. So I think there will be a huge overlap, but I think we still need, I would guess, a year or so that the people from the NFDI really could say that it is useful, I would say, from my perspective.
Yeah, that's great. I think I've also seen some of the NFDI people, after learning a little bit about Bioregistry, they've made some new prefix requests, and there's actually a couple collections that are part of the, yeah, so I didn't mention this earlier, but there's like a collection. So if you just want to make a list of prefixes and annotate something about them, so there's like NFDI collections. Yeah, so this makes it easier for people to access this information from various places. So I'm pretty happy about this. Let's see.
I can talk about what we want to do at Giga Science.
Yeah,
is this the right time? Is this the right time to do it?
The floor is open. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. So this is so people that don't know me, I'm Mary-Ann. I'm a data editor with GigaDB, part of Giga Science Press. Normally Chris Hunter comes to this meeting, but he had a clash, so I'm in his place. So I might not be as up to date with everything that's gone on, but I do know what we want. I haven't prepared any slides, I'm afraid, but I could share my screen and just go through the sort of tickets that we've got, which you know about already, Charlie. Would that be useful just to do that? And then I've got an example of what we're looking at in what we're curating. Right, let me see if I can share my screen. Oh, blimey. Desktop, yeah. Share, okay. Right, you should. Can you see?
Yep, we can see.
I'm just sharing. Yeah, okay, so that's the agenda. Right, so bear with me. Right, so this is the ticket you created, I think, Charlie. Yes, you created it in April, just after the BioCurator meeting, after you had talked to Chris, I believe.
Yep.
So this describes all the stuff that we know, I think. And then there are 3 tickets that you've linked to this, which are all Giga Science tickets that we've created. So I'm not going to talk about this 905 one. I think that's more an internal thing at our end for our submission wizard. But if I go to 424, I think that's the main one. So this is what we want to do. Actually, maybe if I just show you, oh, where did my example go? I had, bear with me, way too many windows. I had an example of one. Oh, sorry, I've got so many tabs open here, which I'm sure you're used to when I've hidden. I put you all down there. Hang on. Not that one, not that one. Ah, here we go. Yes, I think this is a good example. So there, you can see here the two sorts of IDs we're linking to. So environmental objects here and plant ontology objects, which we actually we don't use plant. I think I can't remember which one we use now, but we've gone to a different one now. But the goal is that we would link. This would be a clicky link, and it would go to where it's meant to go. And
I think just gave some slides on this where he also was mentioning in the.
Oh, okay. So those of you that went to Biocurators will know about this. And then the other ones are here, as you can see, the NCBI bioprojects and biosamples. So that's what we want. We want those to be clicky links. Let me go back to where this is. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so this is our format that we curators write GitHub tickets in. So is it related to another problem? Okay, don't worry about the top bit. What is the solution? We would like to have it linked to there. Oh, actually, yeah. So I looked at this today, and these actually go to the same place now.
Yeah, so the oboe pearls kind of in the background redirect into the
yeah. Okay, so I think when okay, so this is over 3 years old, so I guess that's, yeah, ignore that. Oh, and then it goes on to names to things. So I have to be honest that I'm not familiar with that at all, and I haven't really got up to speed with where that is, with where you are with that. But that's something that we're looking at in GigaScience. And then our software people got involved. Okay, and then so this is related to that. So this one was initiated by the Uber on links and etc. And this one is a ticket that focuses just on the NCBI accession numbers. So that is what we want to do in GigaScience, really. And I don't really have anything to just, I'm not a software developer, I'm a curator. So that's all I wanted to say, really, just to put that out there. So I'll stop sharing now, if I can find out where that is. Right, well, I've completely lost. Oh, here we are, stop share. Okay, sorry, back to you, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So just a little context is the name to thing is another registry. It's also integrated within the Bioregistry. And then it also is sort of synced up to some extent with identifiers.org.
Yeah, so I saw on the agenda for today, there's going to be a discussion about making sure that the resources aren't overlapping and the effort sort of thing. Is that right?
Well, the resources actually are partially overlapping, and there's very few ways to deal with that. The Bioregistry is sort of the hub in what we call hub and spoke model, where it can map to everything from all of the other registries and fill in the gaps. When none of them are when no external registry can itself cover all of the use cases, the Bioregistry imports everything and then make sure that the same thing in different places are mapped to each other as well. Yeah, so it's good to remember like the obopearl system is really great for all of the obo ontologies, and that's a good place to start. But as you want to move out into like other types of vocabularies that describe other things, like the biosamples, those don't exist as part of the obopearl infrastructure. So the bioregistry is also like another abstraction layer on top of that. So any resource that you want to make structured annotations, you can imagine in the future GigaScience might also want to or GigaDB might want to include other kinds of vocabularies. And so, yeah, I think the bioregistry is a great place to start to list all of those. Do you have an idea on like if this is something that's just going to have to happen when it becomes part of the next sprint for GigaDB software developers, or this is something that the community can help to like push forward and demonstrate?
Yeah, so I don't know when they last discussed it. Let me get that back. So it hasn't been discussed in our backlog sprinty thingy since you talked to Chris.
Okay. Good.
So I shall go back tomorrow and say, hey, we need to do this. Yeah, it depends on their priorities, I guess, because it's not broken, is it? So
yeah. Okay. Is Renato on the line?
Yep.
Hi. So yeah, not to pick on you, but you're the identifiers.org representative right now. And the last two times we had this workshop, identifiers.org was on graveyard shift, and there actually was nobody working on it other than maybe Henning checking some emails sometimes between like the million other things that he has to do. So it's great that you're here. And I didn't have anything specific to ask you about, but like maybe you can give a little update on like what's going on identifiers.org. What's the work plan? Is there a roadmap? That kind of
stuff. I wasn't expecting the questions, but yeah, sure. As you said, identifiers was kind of the graveyard shift for a while. When I joined by the end of last year, I cleared up the logs and we got to work on some new features with the Fair Impact project. So for those that don't know, the Fair Impact project is part of the EOS umbrella, let's say. And we are basically using identifiers.org as a use case for the project, trying to stay as stable as we can with the new features. So I try not to break anything. Although sometimes I do break some things that you have to fix. I'm sorry for that, Charles. Yeah, basically that's what we are doing. Recently, we have expanded the tombstone information on the record, so there is more information available for those records that are not up anymore, replicated. And we have introduced the idea of protected resources, so those URLs that require authentication. And for now, we don't have any big plans for next features. We have been discussing with the DBCLS people in Japan to have a RDF export and the query scheme, the ability to query it with the Sparkle endpoint. But yeah, we haven't worked so much on it. Yeah, as Nico said, you go to the website there. Yes, so basically that's the identifiers for now. As you said, for now, I'm the only developer. We do have the DBCLS people helping with the curation right now, and me and Henning. And I am splitting my time a bit with the COVID project. So we are trying to keep it up, but there are not that much resources. I hope it's helped anyone, and but if anyone has some specific questions.
Yeah, that's really helpful context. Thanks. I mean, it's sort of the perennial question with all the different registries is, are there places where we can deduplicate efforts or, reduce code that needs to be maintained? It's a little bit tricky with the way that the infrastructure is set up to think about how to do that with identifiers.org. And also, I think it's the case, like, we don't want to redo any curation that's in identifiers.org and Bioregistry. So it imports stuff wholesale, and then it doesn't ask people to do that curation ever again. I mean, typically people are starting to make new prefix requests in both places, but they really don't have to. They only have to do it in one.
Yeah, that's something that would be nice to have some kind of because it seems right now you bring everything from identifiers into Bioregistry. It would be nice to have some level of the other way so that we can also have some of your stuff there on identifiers, even if it's not on our registry, but some kind of redirection would be nice. So yeah, that's something that we should talk about later, I guess.
Yeah, so in the past, I think between prefix comments and identifiers.org and name to thing, this making a two-way sync is very difficult. So we'll have to reconsider that really carefully.
Yeah, we have been trying with entity to try to have the arcs like that again. For a while it seemed to have worked, but right now it's not. They seem to be busy with other projects, so we're trying to see if it works again or not.
I think it's also the case that John Kunze has retired since the last time we had this meeting, and he was a big driving force for that. And so I think other people are working on it. Maybe Donnie Winston is someone we can get in touch with. I think he's still involved with the various parts of name to thing and the surrounding institute.
I can't dig up the name of the person that I talked to last time, because I think it was around February that we had a talk about them having a look, because as you said, after the person moved, the new person was trying to get into the hang of things, but we haven't been talking to her for a while. Maria Good, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't think Maria got the chance to join us tonight. I did message her about it. Okay. Let's see what else is on our list. I think we got everybody. And anyone else have anything? So we've got this whole list of stuff to talk about, various technical issues, some governance issues, some more high level stuff. So we could kind of go down the list, or if anybody wants to comment on some of those or has something to say, floor is open.
Yeah, in connection to the discussion before, I would just, I think it's always good when it's always very realistic and decentralized infrastructures like ours, that there will be multiple resources doing the same thing. And I think that even if they are in some kind of competition in some sense, it would be great if these resources, like we do in OBO and in other communities, we could agree on some basic ideas, like, for example, this extended prefix map as a nice way to share prefix map from the resources, or maybe even buying into the this kind of notions that you've implemented in CURIEs as the default way to deal with reconciliation, standardization, normalization, and all this kind of stuff. So I think that independent of whether you move to a singular infrastructure, these kinds of things would be great first starts, I think.
There's an issue with using the content out of identifiers directly with building up these prefix maps, in that there's a lot of overlapping prefixes that have the same URI format strings. And so this is a very tricky thing to worry about. And there's all sorts of reasons why this happens. So that's something that we tried to solve in the Bioregistry, but it's not pretty. It's kind of a lot of a small number of configurations that you can point to things and say, okay, these are actually the same prefix and should be merged together, or this is a sub prefix of another prefix. This happens a lot where some database has its high level vocabulary, and then there's multiple sub vocabularies in it. I think ZFin is a good example of this. I have to look some of those up. Lindsay, I saw you commented on the PID community issue. So I'm looking at the Google Doc right now. Maybe I can like screen share while we're doing this. And so, yeah, the PID community is like people who care about a lot of similar stuff to what we're talking about today, but there's sort of a different flavor and perspective from PIDs. You know, this like idea of persistence, sort of. I think the CURIEs thing kind of irks people in the persistent identifiers because there's a lot of things going on. I think they're also thinking about global uniqueness. Persistence is, as we know, persistence is a really nice idea, but it's very hard to achieve. So I don't know, Lindsay, do you think you can summarize what you mentioned right here?
Yeah, I think it's more of just an example of it's not a bad idea to engage with them so that they are more aware of how they can be used. Because there's a lot of other working groups, like they have PIDs for instruments, and then a few others where they have these metadata schemas about data sets where you could easily incorporate a query to report on findings from an actual instrument data set. And no one's using anything for it. Right now, they're using text. So this might be an opportunity to integrate with the work that's been done and say, hey, I think we could use CURIEs as another way of extending some of the information about these data model schemas. And so really describing data set metadata in a more thorough and persistent way. And I don't know if people are thinking about it in that way. That it just might be an opportunity to integrate. So this is just a small example of what I think a larger community is aware of about PIDs. And so just getting some of this work into the language that's used as well, and in a different way of understanding what they mean and how they're used might be of a benefit. You know, I think there's a lot of use cases that could really use this. I'm not sure that everyone's aware of it. So that's really what that example is about.
Okay, that's a perfect lead into the next thing I wanted to ask everybody about, which isn't a very big point on here, but in terms of documentation and training material, like what does everybody need? What do they need to learn themselves? What kind of materials do you need to give your new semantics web software developers? What kinds of materials do you need to give your curators? Do those materials not exist? And like stuff related to the Bioregistry or CURIEs, or like this ecosystem of things we're talking about, which also extends to identifiers.org and all of the other related technologies we talked about. Is there something that's sort of blatantly missing that, you know, you wish somebody had written this up, and we can sort of put it on our checklist of things we can think about or write up? So this is a question for the floor.
I mean, as someone who's less involved with some of these developments, obviously, as a user, it'd be great to see user examples. Like, how are people using CURIEs for referencing something in a publication? Like, let's say I want to reference a protein from UniProt in a publication. How could I use the CURIE and the links to do that in a persistent way? Or let's say I'm including some metadata with my mass spec, massive submission. Can I incorporate CURIEs in some way to capture reporting of how you're using that and how you're referencing your data submissions? I mean, any use case of any kind, I think, is beneficial. Mm-hmm. And that's always an ask, no matter where you go.
Yeah. That's a good point. The second one's interesting. So, I mean, the more generic version of the second thing you suggested is like, when there's a data repository, how do we make it so that data repository knows what CURIEs are? Or, you know, if they want to use URIs, it can be any artifact that is structured way of describing entities. And maybe it's the case that we have to like reach out to these the developers and the maintainers of these resources and say, hey, is it possible to like change the way that the submission works to incorporate this information? Actually, I mean, it's a similar idea to what Mary was mentioning for GigaDB.
Yeah, because I do know some of the domain communities will come up with these arbitrary ways of creating identifiers for existing relations where they could probably save some time and confusion by adopting maybe something like this. And I think that would be worthwhile. Yeah.
Okay, Nico just mentioned in the chat, this is a little bit of a sidetrack. If prefix maps are versions, we can reference them from a paper. That way you can unambiguously refer them in papers as well. So I don't know where to organize this. Oh, did you say CURIES?
No, I meant you could, if you say, let's say, if you write a paper where you mention uniprot identifiers or something like that, uniprot, I mean, everyone would know it for sure. But if it's something a bit more odd, you could link a prefix. You could mention, let's say, the version of Bioregistry the paper is referring to, and that way you would know what the interpretation of the CURIEs is supposed to be, and thereby basically enabling persistent identifier mentioning in papers.
Yeah, that's. I want to find an example of where we did this with Manubot. Let's do. Bear with me. I don't know what the name of this one is. Okay, so we use Manubot to write this preprint, which is kind of interesting because we used it's got a great referencing system. Like you just have to give it DOIs and then it makes references for you. So this is already great. And then what we did is we actually like mentioned CURIEs. There's a syntax so you can refer to the query that goes with like some text, and then it uses Bioregistry to look up what the expansion is. And I think this hasn't been rebuilt, but now it goes and it grabs the metadata from the web page and it also incorporates that into the citation. So that's kind of like what we're talking about, similar issue. But you know, Manubot would need to keep track of, here's the version of the Bioregistry I consumed before I did this. By the way, if we do this, we don't have to do NER anymore because we can just put the query annotations inside our things.
Another interesting aspect in terms of adoption of these things is they have these machine actionable data management plans. And so that's another way of like, what standard are you using to report entities and whatever it is that you're doing. And these would be another use case example of you can list Bioregistry, and then here's an example of how you would list that. I think it's called MADMP, but that might be interesting because I don't know if there's been any further development examples, and it might be kind of interesting to see that.
Cool. Can you link to that or to what you're just talking about in the Google Doc?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, let's keep going down the list. Does anybody else have something that was interesting to them? So maybe someone who, or if you're just listening, that's fine too. James Overton, can I pick on you? Are you able to talk?
Yeah, I'm here.
What are you thinking about these days? Like you've attended all of our workshops in the last couple of years, and the Bioregistry is a different flavor of a problem that you've solved in a very good way with the Perl system and how this has kind of made it to the OBO community. So what are you thinking these days?
I don't know. I think I don't have the problems that you have, and I'm happy not to have the problems you have, because I force people to do things the way I say they should do them. I don't know, maybe that's, I don't know. So in OBO, more than 20 years ago, before I started doing this stuff, we made a bunch of rules for how Perl's identifiers should work. Then we've implemented them, and when we followed those rules strictly, things have mostly worked. And when we haven't followed those strictly, then it's been a disaster. And one of the key things is like DBXRFs, where they did not use full IRIs or URIs. They just used prefixes. And then, I don't know, you spent the last 5 years fixing that problem for people who did that. And I don't know, that was just a bad idea in the first place. So I don't know, I come to these calls to listen to what you're doing and stay updated. But for most part, I just stick to the OBO world and don't need most of these solutions. I don't know. I have thought about looking at the CURIEs package. I write a lot of Rust these days, and so I guess is there a Rust implementation that somebody's working on, or is there interest in doing the CURIEs package, especially the core algorithms for expanding and contracting in the whatever prefix trees or tries or whatever they're pronounced?
Yeah, there is interest in doing this in Rust, and if you want to participate in that, that would be great. I think I could probably figure out how to program in Rust, but after a long time not working in Java, going back and figuring out how to package up all of the Java version of the CURIEs package, like it was a huge problem. It took so much effort because I just didn't know the community. It had been so long since I'd programmed in Java. And I think I'm hoping that Rust has done it a little bit better with their whole packaging system. It's a little bit more standardized, but having a little mentorship would be great.
Yeah, yeah, you should loop me in on that. Well, I don't know. I mean, I agree with the point of having one good implementation instead of a whole bunch of crappy implementations of the basic operations. Yeah, I don't know. I looking at that package and the API, it is interesting how you have sets of, well, kind of declarative strategies for resolving all these things. I guess I just haven't used that stuff. I just stick to my oboe prefix map.
That's good. Yeah, thanks. All right. Anybody else have anything?
Just while we're talking about oboe, one thing that so we load in OLS all of the ontologies from the oboe config file, which is the YAML file provided by the Foundry. The one thing that it doesn't actually provide, so it provides a preferred prefix, but it doesn't actually provide the IRI prefix. It's just the Curie prefix. So you can construct the URI prefix by doing like hard coding it as perl.oberlibrary.org/oboe/id_. But we literally had to hard code that because there's nothing in. Although it would be the same format for all of the oboe ontologies, I feel like it should still be provided because otherwise you have to kind of magic it from somewhere.
It's worse than that, James. It's actually not the case that all of the oboe ontologies can be like the same way turned into an IRI, because there's a couple that don't follow the oboe Perl system.
Yeah, and I think there's like a random term, which is like a really commonly used term that's in the wrong ontology because it got moved at some point. And I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but I think it's like, is it a BFO term that's in something else, or like an RO term?
There's some
in
BFO
terms the part of relationship is it's a BFO relationship in RO.
Yeah, so that kind of confuses the whole thing. So I don't think oboe is actually like gets off scot-free here. There are a couple of issues that I think, yeah, I don't know who would.
But just to be clear, the using the preferred prefix is actually the right way to construct the IRI prefix. So of course you need to know, let's say you need to know the part before that, but I mean that's known for everything.
We have to hard code that part in OLS, right? So
yeah, but
we have like if it's an oboe ontology, then use this hard coded IRI string. Otherwise, read it from the config.
Okay, but you have a config file, so you must already know that you're in the oboe context, right? So because you're reading from the config, I mean.
Yeah, but we shouldn't have if oboe this, else that. Like that's like not a good thing to have, because then for other ontologies that aren't oboe, we do have to provide the IRI prefix.
I mean, on the other side of things, we have a prefix map that we export that we also use in Robot that you could use alternatively to turn these things around, so you don't need to actually hard code it at all. But what you are asking for basically is to store the prefix map redundantly in the ontology metadata, which I mean,
I don't think
you
it's
could
redundant because that information is not in the ontology metadata.
no,
Like,
it's not in the ontology metadata, but it's in the prefix map. Yeah, so we have a prefix map that is.
And I need to go to a completely different source when I've already got a YAML file which lists all of the ontologies.
Okay, you can make an issue, and we can discuss this.
Okay. I feel like the discussion is kind of slowing down a little bit. We could call it, and you know, everyone can just say they're still in a meeting and take a nice half-hour coffee break. Any final words? So from my side, I think it'd be nice to think about going forward and writing a second bioregistry paper. A little bit less about bioregistry, maybe more about like the capabilities and the needs of the community, and to some extent how the bioregistry is mapping onto that. But you know, also talking about the CURIEs package and some of these other tools and how this really is supporting what people are doing. So yeah, that's I mean, there's a list at the bottom of the Google Doc. Anybody who wants to be part of that is welcome to join.
Yeah, I can also say I got everything I needed from the workshop. I'm very happy to see all the updates and the stuff that is going on. I also wanted to congratulate again for getting all this like great CZI funding. This is really amazing, and it also gave others some hope to maybe also acquire some funding like that. So yeah, this is really good to hear, and to know that this is going to be supported for a while into the future is really cool. Yeah, and I would like to see a bit of so I would like to see more kind of like trainings around using the Curie package, and maybe some effort to try and kind of semi-standardize the EPM format, maybe. Yeah, something like that. I like the notions you implemented in the CURIEs package, and I would like the community to kind of agree on these ways of reconciling, standardizing, and normalizing identifiers.
It's a big goal for the next year. Okay, let's leave it at that. Thank you, Nico, for putting in some nice last words. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and participating in discussion and sharing your ideas.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you.
Let's please keep the discussion going on the Google Doc if you feel like it. Feel free to get on the issue tracker and on Onobo. See y'all there. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.